To everyone here who made the effort and the time to come out here today to hear about this disease. And I'm really grateful for the opportunity to share my story, which is the one story, but I think a story that a lot of patients share. Senator Markey gave such a great introduction that I'm going to skip over some of these pieces and kind of jump right into my story. So 5 years ago, this was me. I was a PhD student at Harvard, and I loved to travel. I had just gotten engaged to the love of my life. I was 28, and like so many of us, if we were young and healthy, I felt like I was invincible. Then one day I had a fever of 104.7 degrees. After the fever broke, I was so dizzy, I would walk into door frames, and I couldn't leave my house for 3 weeks. I had to hug the walls just to make it to the bathroom. I got infection after infection that year. But every time I saw my doctor, he told me there was nothing wrong. He had his standard commercial laboratory tests, and they always came back normal. Some doctors even told me that I was just stressed or depressed, that it was all in my head, or that maybe it was just my final exams catching up with me. I saw every kind of specialist: neurologists, rheumatologists, cardiologists, endocrinologists. I was lucky and I had resources. It only took me 2 years to get diagnosed. But by that time, I had gotten so sick that I wasn't able even to sit in this wheelchair, and I was extremely sensitive to light and sound. I ended up confined to my bedroom without support or treatment and without even an explanation for my illness. I would go weeks without seeing my kitchen, and when I felt like I was becoming a burden on my husband, I thought a lot about taking my own life. What changed things for me was joining this vibrant community of patients around the world. I found a voice and I became a patient activist. And I started to film some of the people that I met. I'm going to show you a trailer from the film that Emily talked about, Unrest, which premiered at Sundance in January and will air on PBS early next year. And it's a look at some of the patients who are on the more severe end of the spectrum, which is a world that I think has been hidden from us for many years. This was my time before. We all have one, whether or not we know it yet.
And film by Jennifer Brea.
Today we talked with a U.S. student studying abroad in Beijing.
Well, I know some of us are kind of scared, actually.
I can't say that it was perfect or that I had any idea what I was doing, but it was mine, and I loved it. And then I met Omar. Three months later, I knew that I wanted to marry him. Being together, exploring the world, I thought that would be our lives.
I can't understand love. Say it again.
It's been called the yuppie flu, Epstein-Barr, and a living hell by those who suffer from it.
There's still no adequate medical explanation, but there's also a psychological factor.
If you say too little, they can't help you, and if you say too much, they think you're a mental patient.
And it was just a committee that came up with this perfectly horrid name, chronic fatigue syndrome.
Chronic fatigue syndrome. Yeah, I'm tired too.
As my body was falling apart, nothing anyone said made sense.
Hi, Jen.
Hi. I decided to tell a different story.
I have been severely unwell for 8 years.
Injection me.vs.champagne.
Me.vs.champagne.
This is not a story of me fighting a medical mystery and, discovering my cure against all odds. Although, honestly, I would take that story any day. And it's not young love triumphing over all. And, it is a little bit.
If it were just me, you would think that this was some weird tragedy, a freak lightning bolt, and you wouldn't understand that this happens all of the time.
I'm completely bedridden. I've lost the ability to walk.
I was 10 years old when I first got sick.
I forteltet, der står der 5 betjente. Jeg sagde et eller andet med, at I kan da ikke bare brase ind til en dødssyg ME-patient.
Så kørte de med Karina, uden vi var oppe og sige farvel eller noget, så vi må ikke engang se hende eller noget.
It's an extremely complicated disease involving the immune system and the brain and who knows what else. I have to do this quickly because my son is so ill.
We still have hope. We know what the government can do with a commitment.
I've never said, oh, I'm going to beat this. The truth is, I can't possibly know, but we can fight.
I have faith that we are going to cure this, that we are going to get better, that you are going to be whole once again.
There's the sun. I'm making this film to save my life. What else can you do when your story is stolen from you, but try and write a new one? Senator Markey gave an amazing overview of some of the numbers, but I'm going to just sort of reiterate them a little bit because I think they're worth kind of digging into. So we know from the Institute of Medicine report that between 836,000 and 2.5 million Americans are affected by this disease, which means that it's at least twice as common as multiple sclerosis. And it's an extremely it's a disease that costs the economy roughly $24 billion a year. And I've been really grappling ever since I got sick, and this was not a disease I knew anything about, and I had ever really heard of before I became affected by it. And I still don't fully have the answer, but I have been trying to kind of figure out over the last many years how a disease that is this prevalent and removes millions of people from their lives, often in their most productive years, how as we have as a society, not only done almost nothing to help them, but have often added to that that marginalization and added to the stigma. And so how do we get here? I think that there are 3 core reasons. First, the stigma and misconceptions about the disease. Second, a lack of medical education. And third, a lack of research funding. And so as far as stigma goes, when you hear the word chronic fatigue syndrome, what do you think of? You think of someone who is chronically tired and perhaps a more severe version of something that we all feel from time to time. Here's how I would describe it. I feel like I am a broken iPhone battery that only ever charges to about 40%. And as long as I stay within that 40%, I look normal and I can function. But if I exceed whatever my metabolic limit is, all of my symptoms, neurological, cardiovascular, gastrointestinal, they all flare. And I will end up bedridden in a day, again, sometimes for days, sometimes for weeks, unable to speak or even lift my head. This is a spectrum disorder, so for some of us, our battery may be able to charge to 90%, and we can still work, but we have to spend a day a week in bed recovering. This is Whitney. His battery charges to probably only 5, maybe 10%. He's been bedridden now for 3 years. He can't speak. He can barely tolerate the touch of a loved one or the sound of a human voice. It is difficult for even his family to be in his room. And so he lives at home, but no one has spoken to him in years. Carol is going to talk later about some of the concrete ways that you can help us to take action, but I think that every single person in this room and every single member sitting in Congress can help us just by using the soft power of of their offices to help us dislodge this image, which has done so much harm for so many years. So I invite you to support your constituents' advocacy efforts, support our National Day of Awareness, which is May 12th, when it comes again around next year, and communicate your support of this disease to the agencies that I think can and should do more to address this major public health issue. The second is the lack of medical education. So me.vs.disease is not a part of almost any medical curricula. And Nancy Klimas, who's a doctor you saw in the trailer, when she was at the University of Miami, used to have to teach medical students during lunch about the disease because it wasn't taught at her university. It takes an average of 5 years to diagnose this, which is why I say I was lucky that I got diagnosed within 2 years. But I remain firmly convinced that if I had been diagnosed within weeks or months of the onset of my illness, that I would never have become bedridden and I would not be in a wheelchair today. There are thousands of research articles that have never been translated into clinical practice, and we have no specialty homes. So if you have a major life-altering disease, whether it's cancer or multiple sclerosis, you get diagnosed and then you get referred to a specialist. You get referred to a neurologist or to a rheumatologist, and we have no specialty homes. So if you get diagnosed by your primary care doctor, there's basically nothing that they can do for you. And the fourth is research funding, which Senator Markey touched upon. So on average, for the last many years, MS patients get about $250 per patient in NIH research funding each year. For HIV, it's about $2,500 per patient. And for me.CFS patients, it's about $2 to $5. And so I think one of the best visuals for this is from a paper by Dimmick and Jason, which is this funding by disease burden. And so the A that you see over there is sort of where we're funded today. And you can see that given how many people are affected and how disabled they are, this disease is dramatically underfunded and more than almost any disease that the NIH currently researches. And I would also say that it's in part because of the investment we've made over decades in HIV that I'm able to take medications that allow me to even be here today. So here's the good news. We believe that this disease is treatable and that with investment in research and clinical care, millions of people could be returned to their lives. There are so many problems that are really complicated and difficult to fix at a policy level. And I think while there are scientific challenges, on a policy level, this is an imminently fixable problem. And I think if we as a society and as a country made the choice today to invest what this disease deserves in terms of research and medical care, then millions of people could be returned to their families and to their lives. Thank you.